What if the school bully picked on the wrong girl? One with a connection so powerful it could not only change her life, but shatter the fragile kingdom he built on fear. This is the story of Maya Jordan, a quiet new student who becomes the unwilling target of Bryce Carter, the most feared and revered guy at Northwood High. He sees her as a nobody, a weak and easy victim to solidify his reign. But what he doesn't know is that Maya has a secret, a legacy of greatness flowing through her veins, one that will turn the tables in the most definitive and humiliating way imaginable. What begins with a bully's casual cruelty will end with his complete and utter downfall. Maya Jordan stepped off the city bus, the humid embrace of a North Carolina September morning clinging to her skin. She gripped the straps of her backpack, her knuckles white, as she stared up at the sprawling brick facade of Northwood High School. It was an imposing structure, a place that screamed tradition and history, with ivy crawling up its walls and a grand, arched entrance that looked more like a gateway to a fortress than a place of learning. The air, thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and the lingering warmth of summer on asphalt, buzzed with the chaotic energy of a new school year. Students moved in fluid, confident clusters, their laughter and overlapping conversations a language Maya didn't speak. She felt the familiar pang of being an outsider, a ghost haunting the edges of someone else's world. This was her fourth high school in 3 years, a nomadic existence not born of parental job transfers, but of necessity. Each move was a desperate attempt to find a place where she could simply be, a place where the shadow of her family name didn't precede her, coloring every interaction before it even began. She needed a fresh start. Again, keeping her head down, a practiced maneuver of self-preservation, she moved toward the main doors, a solitary ship navigating a turbulent sea of Letterman jackets and designer jeans. A few heads turned, their curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar face, but Maya's gaze remained fixed on the ground, her long braids creating a curtain between her and the world. She had mastered the art of being invisible. Northwood High was the epitome of suburban affluence. It was a world of privilege, filled with the sons and daughters of doctors, lawyers, and tech executive skids who had known each other since their days on the kindergarten playground. The social hierarchy was as rigid and unyielding as the brick walls around her, established long before she ever set foot on campus. The football team, the Titans, were local deities. The cheer squad, a collection of perfectly manicured queens, ruled the social scene with ironclad smiles. None of it mattered to Maya. Her objective was singular and absolute: remain unseen, unheard, and uninvolved. The moment she stepped inside, the hallway's roar enveloped her. The percussive slam of lockers, the squeak of expensive sneakers on polished linoleum, the harried calls of teachers trying to herd students into classroom sit was a symphony of teenage life she had heard many times before. Clutching the stiff paper of her schedule, she began the ritual: find the locker, map out the classrooms, identify the quiet corners of the cafeteria, and, most crucially, pinpoint the individuals she needed to avoid at all costs. That's when she saw him, Bryce Carter. He was exactly the type she had learned to spot from a mile away. Tall, with the broad-shouldered, athletic build of a quarterback, which he was. He possessed an effortless, almost arrogant confidence that clung to him like expensive cologne. He was leaning against a bank of royal blue lockers, the center of a solar system of orbiting acolytes, all of them laughing a little too loudly at something he'd just said. Even from across the hall, Maya could feel his gravitational pull. He had an aura of absolute control, the kind that made people either desperately want to be his friend or desperately want to stay out of his way. He was the golden boy, star athlete, handsome, from a family whose name was plastered on half the new developments in town. But Maya saw beyond the polished veneer. She saw the subtle tells she had learned to recognize from past encounters with boys like him. The way his friends' laughter was laced with a nervous edge, the way they shifted their weight, ever so slightly, when his attention turned to them. Maya knew this archetype intimately. He was a predator who thrived on power, who fed on the intimidation of others, to feel secure in his own skin. She had no intention of ever entering his orbit. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. As she navigated the crowded corridor, trying to make her way to the administrative office, someone deliberately bumped her shoulder. It wasn't a casual jostle. It was a firm, intentional shove. Her binder and textbooks tumbled from her grasp, skittering across the floor in a chaotic mess. The hallway's ambient noise seemed to dip as a small circle of attention formed around her. A few students snickered. Others just stared, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Ignoring the heat rising in her cheeks, she bent down, her movements quick and efficient, wanting nothing more than to retrieve her belongings and disappear. Well, what do we have here? The voice was smooth, laced with a mocking amusement that made the hairs on Maya's arms stand up. She didn't have to look up. She knew exactly who it was. Bryce Carter. His voice was like a lion's purr, deceptively calm but with an undercurrent of menace. The chuckles from his friends confirmed it. Slowly, deliberately, she gathered the last of her books and rose to her feet. She finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. He stood over her, arms crossed over his chest, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. It was the look of a king observing a peasant who had stumbled into his court, a look she had seen on the faces of bullies who believed the world was their personal playground. "I don't think I've seen you around here before," he said, his tone suggesting she was an interesting new toy he'd just discovered. Maya didn't answer. She clutched her books to her chest and made a move to brush past him. Silence was her shield, indifference her sword. But Bryce wasn't accustomed to being ignored. "Hey," he called out, his voice sharp, cutting through the hallway chatter. "I asked you a question. Where are your manners?" Maya kept walking, her heart pounding a steady, defiant rhythm against her ribs. She had played this game before. Engaging was a trap. It gave them the reaction they craved, the fuel for their fire. The best strategy was to give them nothing. But Bryce Carter did not like being denied. She felt it then, a sharp, insistent tug on the strap of her backpack, pulling her to an abrupt halt. It wasn't violent enough to hurt, but it was a clear, unmistakable assertion of dominance. A message. "I'm not done with you." Maya stopped. The hallway seemed to fall silent around them. Even students who had been oblivious before were now watching, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Slowly, she turned, her body moving with a controlled grace that belied the storm brewing inside her. She met Bryce's gaze again, and this time, she didn't look away. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his eyes, not just amusement, but a flicker of curiosity, maybe even a hint of surprise at her lack of fear. "You shouldn't have done that," Maya said, her voice quiet but carrying a weight that seemed to surprise him. Bryce's eyebrow arched in mock disbelief. Then he laughed, a slow, condescending sound. "Oh yeah? And why is that?" He smirked, leaning in slightly. Maya held his gaze, her expression unreadable. She didn't offer an explanation. She didn't need to. The silence was her answer. He tilted his head, studying her. "You're kind of weird, you know that?" A few of his friends snickered on cue. Without another word, Maya turned and walked away, leaving him standing there. She didn't have to look back to know that his eyes were still on her, a predator who had just had his prey walk away from him. This was far from over. Bryce Carter had just made the biggest mistake of his high school career, and he had absolutely no idea. The rest of the day passed in a haze of forced anonymity. Maya chose a seat in the back of every classroom, answering questions only when directly called upon, her voice a low monotone. She ate her lunch at a small, isolated table at the far edge of the sprawling cafeteria, a vantage point from which she could observe the school's social ecosystem without being a part of it. Bryce and his court held the center of the room, their laughter and loud pronouncements dominating the space. Every so often, Maya would feel his gaze drift toward her, a probing, analytical stare. He was trying to figure her out, to find a crack in her armor. He didn't approach her again, not yet. He was biding his time, letting the tension build. By the time the final bell rang, a wave of relief washed over Maya. She just wanted to escape the suffocating confines of the school and breathe. The North Carolina heat was still oppressive, making the pavement shimmer as she walked toward the designated parent pickup area, a less chaotic alternative to the bus loop. Just as she reached for her phone to send a text, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Hey, new girl." She turned. Bryce stood there, hands shoved casually into the pockets of his designer jeans, that infuriating grin plastered on his face once more. A couple of his friends, Ryan and Kevin, lingered a few feet behind him, a silent, menacing backup chorus. Maya sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "What do you want, Bryce?" He took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. "You've got a real attitude problem, you know that?" Maya remained silent, her expression impassive. Bryce's smirk widened, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "What, you think you're better than me or something?" A short, humorless laugh escaped Maya's lips. It wasn't a sound of nervousness or fear. It was a sound of genuine, almost pitying amusement. And that, more than anything she could have said, seemed to catch Bryce completely off guard. "I think," she said, her voice low and even, "that you should walk away right now." His grin faltered for a split second before he quickly recovered, his pride wounded. "Oh yeah?" He took another step, his taller frame now looming over her, a classic intimidation tactic. "And why is that?" Maya leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing him to strain to hear her. "Because you have no idea who I am." Bryce chuckled, a hollow, dismissive sound, shaking his head as if she were a delusional child. "And who are you exactly?" Maya didn't answer him directly. Instead, she took a deliberate step back, creating space between them. She lifted her phone, her thumb hovering over a single contact on her screen. She pressed the call button. Less than a minute later, a low, powerful rumble filled the air, growing steadily louder. A sleek, black Mercedes Maybach S-Class, a car so opulent and rare it looked like it belonged in a music video, pulled silently to the curb. The car was the personification of quiet, unassailable wealth and power. It didn't need to be loud and flashy like a muscle car. Its presence alone was a statement. The tinted rear window glided down with a soft whir, and there he was. Michael Jordan. He wasn't wearing a jersey or athletic gear. He was dressed in a tailored suit, looking every bit the billionaire businessman he was. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just sat there, his gaze, legendary for its intensity on the court, fixed directly on Bryce Carter. It was a look that had unnerved the world's greatest athletes, a look that could strip away every ounce of confidence a person possessed. Bryce's smirk didn't just vanish, it was annihilated. His jaw went slack, his face paling under his tan. The casual arrogance in his stance evaporated, replaced by a rigid, stunned stillness. His friends, Ryan and Kevin, looked like they had seen a ghost, their mouths hanging open in disbelief. Maya turned back to Bryce, a slow, knowing smile finally gracing her lips for the first time that day. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a simple, factual one. "Still think I'm weird?" she asked, her voice calm and clear in the suddenly silent afternoon air. Bryce didn't answer. He couldn't. For the first time in his privileged, entitled life, Bryce Carter was the one who felt small. He was the one who was completely and utterly out of his league. The silence that descended upon the pickup lane was absolute. Bryce's confident smirk had been replaced by a mask of slack-jawed disbelief. His eyes, wide and unblinking, darted from Maya to the iconic figure in the back seat of the Maybach, then back again, as if his brain was struggling to process a reality it couldn't comprehend. The air, once charged with his arrogance, now felt thick with his humiliation. He took an involuntary half-step back, a retreat so subtle it was almost imperceptible, but Maya saw it. His friends, who usually mirrored his every move, were frozen, their faces a comical blend of awe and terror. Maya, in stark contrast, was the picture of calm. She took her time, adjusting the strap of her backpack, letting out a slow, deliberate breath. She had just detonated a bomb in the middle of Bryce's carefully constructed universe, and she wanted him to feel the full force of the blast. Michael Jordan remained silent, his presence alone a crushing weight. One hand rested on the plush leather armrest, his gaze unwavering, fixed on Bryce. It was the same look he'd given opponents from the free throw line, with the championship on the linea, look of pure, unadulterated focus and power that needed no words to convey its message. "Wait a second," Bryce finally managed to mutter, the words barely audible. It wasn't a question, but a desperate plea to his own senses, trying to convince himself that this wasn't real. His voice, usually so loud and commanding, was thin and reedy. He looked at Maya again, his eyes scanning her face as if searching for a clue he had missed, a piece of the puzzle that would make it all make sense. Maya leaned in slightly, her voice low and steady, for his ears only. "Still think I'm just some random girl you can push around?" Bryce's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His mouth opened, then closed, like a fish gasping for air. The words had abandoned him. Then, Michael's voice cut through the tension. It was calm, deep, and firm. "Get in, Maya." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a command. Without a moment's hesitation, Maya walked past Bryce, past the stunned silence of the small crowd of students that had begun to form, and pulled open the heavy passenger door. The moment she slid into the cool, leather-scented interior, the car's engine purred to life. With a silent, powerful grace, the Maybach pulled away from the curb, leaving behind a maelstrom of whispers and widened eyes. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The manicured lawns and stately homes of Northwood blurred past the tinted windows, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden streaks across the polished dashboard. Maya let her fingers drum a light, steady rhythm against her knee, consciously releasing the tension that had been coiling in her stomach since she first stepped onto that campus. Michael kept his eyes on the road, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice softer now. Maya gave a short nod. Then, a small laugh escaped her. That was a little dramatic, wasn't it? A rare, genuine smirk touched Michael's lips. "A little," he conceded. She shook her head, her gaze drifting out the window. "I didn't want them to find out. Not like that." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "And what would have been a better way? Letting some punk kid like that walk all over you?" Maya sighed, resting her head back against the supple leather of the headrest. "I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. I was just waiting." Michael raised an eyebrow. "For what?" She shrugged. "For the right moment. To handle it myself." He was quiet for a long moment, navigating a turn with practiced ease. "You know," he said finally, "the toughest opponents I ever faced weren't the ones who talked the most trash. They were the ones who were quiet. The ones who watched, who learned, who waited for you to make a mistake. They let you defeat yourself." He paused, letting the words sink in. "You sound like them." Maya turned to him, the corner of her mouth twitching into a smirk that mirrored his own. "That's a scary thought." He let out a full, rumbling laugh this time, the sound filling the car. "Smartass." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the familiar rhythm of their banter dissolving the last of the day's tension. But Maya knew this was only the beginning. Bryce Carter was not the type to let a public humiliation go unanswered. Fear, especially in someone like him, had a nasty habit of metastasizing into rage. When they pulled into the long, gated driveway of their homey stunning, modern estate nestled in a secluded, wooded enclave, Maya unbuckled her seatbelt but didn't move to get out. Michael noticed. "Something else on your mind?" Maya hesitated, then let out a long breath. "He's not done with me." Michael studied her, his expression serious now. "No," he said, his voice steady. "He's not, but you're not done with him either." Maya met his gaze, her own reflecting his intensity. "You think I should fight back?" He leaned back in his seat, turning slightly to face her. "Fighting back doesn't always mean throwing a punch, Maya. Sometimes it means having the discipline to not react. It means being smarter. You let him swing wildly while you stand your ground. Eventually, he'll tire himself out and knock himself over. Guys like him, they don't like losing control. So you let him think he has it, right up until the moment he realizes he never did." Maya processed his words, a sense of clarity settling over her. He wasn't telling her to be a victim. He was telling her to be a strategist. Finally, she nodded, a determined glint in her eye. Yeah, I know. The next morning, Maya expected whispers. She was not prepared for the roar. As she walked through the hallways of Northwood High, she felt like the main attraction at a zoo. The weight of 1,000 glances pressed in on her. Murmurs and hushed conversations followed her like a shadow, spreading through the student body like wildfire. She spotted Bryce's crew near the lockers. They were huddled together, a tight-knit group of athletes and wannabes, all of them shooting daggers at her with their eyes. Bryce stood in the center, leaning against the metal, his arms crossed. When he saw her, there was no smirk, no taunt. Just a cold, hard stare, filled with a venomous mixture of anger and humiliation. Maya didn't flinch. She met his gaze, held it for a beat longer than necessary, and then turned and walked to her first class. She could feel his stare burning into her back, but she didn't care. If Bryce wanted to play a long game, she was ready. Her father had taught her all about patience and strategy. By lunchtime, the game had escalated. As she carried her tray toward her usual solitary table, one of Bryce's cronies, the stocky linebacker Ryan, accidentally stuck his foot out. Maya felt herself stumble, but years of dance and athletic training allowed her to catch her balance before she could fall completely. Her tray clattered, drawing the attention of half the cafeteria. A few students turned to watch, their eyes darting between her and the group of jocks, who were now laughing openly. Maya straightened up, calmly adjusting the items on her tray. She didn't react, which seemed to infuriate them more. "What's the matter, princess?" Ryan grinned, his voice dripping with condescension. "No comeback?" Maya exhaled sharply, a ghost of a smirk on her lips. "I was just surprised. I didn't realize they let people who peaked in high school sit at the big kids' table." A collective ooh rippled through the nearby tables. Ryan's grin vanished, replaced by a flush of red that crawled up his neck. Bryce, who had been watching the entire exchange with a calculating expression, tilted his head slightly. He was trying to find her weakness, and he was failing. Maya didn't give them another chance. She walked past their table, sat down at her own, and began to eat, as if nothing had happened. But she knew. This was just another move on the chessboard. She was right. By the end of the day, when she went to her locker, she found it had been vandalized. Vulgar words were scrawled across the blue paint in thick black marker. Her books dumped unceremoniously on the floor. A small group of students stood nearby, watching, none brave enough to intervene, but all of them eager to see the drama unfold. She sighed, a sound of weary resignation, not surprise. She could feel Bryce watching from down the hall, waiting for the tears, for the anger, for any sign that he had finally gotten to her. She gave him nothing. Calmly, she bent down and picked up her books one by one, stacking them neatly. Her hands didn't shake. Her expression didn't waver. She stood, shut her defaced locker, and walked away without a single word. That, more than anything, seemed to unnerve him. Her refusal to play the victim was dismantling his power one quiet act at a time. That night, she sat at the massive granite island in their kitchen, tapping her fingers against the cool stone. Michael leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching her. "They trashed my locker today," she said, her voice flat. He raised an eyebrow. "That's their best move?" Maya smirked. "For now." He nodded slowly. "So, what's yours?" Maya was quiet for a moment, a thoughtful expression on her face. Then, a slow, calculated smile spread across her lips. "I'm going to let him dig his own grave." Michael grinned, a look of pure pride in his eyes. "Now that's my girl." Maya leaned back, feeling a familiar thrill, the same one she felt when she was about to sink a perfect free throw. Bryce Carter thought he was the one running this game. But Maya was just getting started, and she never played to lose.